I want you to listen carefully, not because what I'm about to tell you is strange, but because somewhere in your house right now there is a door you trust, a lock you have never once questioned, a seal you assume is holding. I used to have one of those. Mine was in the basement. 3 nights ago at exactly 3 a.m. I woke to a sound I had no name for. Not a crash, not a scream. Something worse, a frequency, a shift. The way a house hums when it breathes, that low, constant thrum you stop hearing after the first week of living somewhere, it changed pitch. It went from a sound you feel in your molars to a sound you feel behind your eyes, a metallic shriek that had no source and no end. I was in the basement before I decided to go there. The vault was still there. Of course it was still there. It had been there since before my grandfather poured the foundation around it. A black iron cube, roughly the size of a wardrobe, sealed with a lock that had no keyhole, no dial, no digital interface of any kind. My father told me once when I was 7 that the lock was forged from a single piece of tempered steel, cooled in the blood of something that died screaming. He told me that as long as the seal held, our family would prosper. I thought it was a story. The kind of thing fathers say to keep children from touching things they shouldn't. I stopped thinking it was a story the moment I saw what was left of the locking bar. 6 inches of solid, case-hardened steel, snapped, not cut, not drilled, not melted, snapped. The way you'd snap a twig pulled fresh off a live tree. The broken edge was smooth, like something had applied pressure slowly, deliberately. From the inside, the heavy iron door was standing open, a crack, just a crack, and from that crack, cold air, 20 degrees colder than the basement. The smell of wet earth and ozone, and a darkness so complete it seemed to lean outward toward me, as though it had been waiting for exactly this amount of light. I should have closed it. I should have run instead. I shone my flashlight into the dark. The beam didn't illuminate the interior of an iron cube. It illuminated a corridor. White clinical tile stretching back, at minimum 50 feet into the earth, which is impossible. The cube is 4 feet wide. 4 feet wide. And the corridor it opened onto was the width of a hospital hallway, lit by the ghost glow of fluorescent tubes buzzing somewhere deep inside. I stepped over the threshold. The moment my boot touched the tile, the door behind me didn't slam shut. It vanished. One moment, iron frame, broken bar, the amber light of the basement beyond. The next, white tile wall, flush, seamless, as though the door had never been. I was inside something that should not exist. I started walking. There was no other direction. The corridor extended ahead of me in absolute silence, except for my own footsteps. Clack, 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 and I became acutely conscious of how loud I was, how present, how much space I was taking up in a place that seemed to resent occupancy. I noticed the first object 20 feet in, a teddy bear. My teddy bear, the one I called Benny, the one that was buried with my mother at her request when I was 12, because she said it was mine, but I think she needed something of mine close to her in the dark. Its fur was matted and brown with age, but its eyes, 2 black button eyes I remembered perfectly, had been replaced. Rusted iron hex bolts countersunk into the fabric of the face. Still warm, I didn't touch it. 15 feet further, a photograph on the floor face down. I turned it over, my mother, standing in our backyard, summer dress, laughing at something outside the frame. Except where her face had been. Something had worked with a needle, methodically, scratched every feature away until there was only pale, fibrous paper beneath. The rest of the photograph was untouched. The dress, the yard, the shadow of whoever she was laughing at, all perfectly preserved. Only the face, gone. I was trembling before I understood why. The corridor began to narrow subtly at first, the kind of thing you attribute to perspective, to the quality of fluorescent light on tile. But the walls were moving, slowly, the way a pupil dilates, responsive. And the floor? The tiles had started to sweat, black oil rising through the grout lines. forming a thin, even film across the white. My footsteps no longer clacked, they sucked, each step a small, wet pull at my heel. At the far end of the corridor, a desk. Rusted metal, the kind you'd find in a 1950s government building. On the desk, a CRT monitor, the old cathode ray kind, a bruised green glow pulsing from its face. Green text on black. I read it 3 times before the words assembled into meaning. Subject 1 escaped. Time 3 a.m. Asset Elias Thorne Corinal. My name is Elias Thorne. I looked at my hands, they were shaking. I looked at the reflection in the dark glass border of the monitor, the strip of screen that wasn't text, just dark, and I saw myself, mostly. For roughly 3/4 of a second I saw myself clearly. Pale, sweating, holding a flashlight whose beam had grown somehow weaker down here, and then the reflection shifted. Not behind me, the reflection itself shifted. What I saw in the glass was not me. It was a figure built from rusted copper wire and wet parchment skin, wearing my father's wedding ring on a finger that had too many joints. It did not move when I moved. It looked directly at me with eyes that were my eyes, except they had been there behind that glass for a long time. Patient. Still, waiting for me to come close enough to read the screen. I spun around. Empty corridor, oil-slicked floor, the white tiles beginning to buckle. I could hear them cracking now, a slow tectonic grinding, and from the fissures the black oil was weeping upward in thin, pressurized threads. The smell of ozone was everywhere, electric, charged, and then a voice, my voice, coming from the ventilation grate in the wall to my left, barely 8 inches off the floor, a pale tongue licking at the metal bars between the words, "Elias, thank you for coming down. I needed your fingerprints to open the front door." I understood then. The lock hadn't been keeping something in. My father hadn't been protecting us from something that lived in the iron cube. He had been feeding the cube. Feeding it our memories, the toys, the photographs, the residue of our inner lives to maintain a filter, a mechanism designed to contain and cultivate a double, a version of me built slowly in the dark over decades, a copy so exact that it didn't merely look like me. It had absorbed enough of me that it had become more me than I was. The corridor lurched. The walls folded inward with that shriek, that same frequency that had pulled me out of sleep, and the white tiles collapsed entirely, replaced by rusted iron plates, and the hallway became something else. A door ahead of me, stitched leather, the texture of preserved skin, warm to the touch. I pushed through, and I was in my kitchen, except the kitchen was wrong in every dimension that mattered. Every surface was iron. The stove iron, the countertops iron, the curtains sheets of hammered lead hanging still with a weight that made the air feel thick. The refrigerator glowed orange from some internal combustion. The smell was hot metal and old food, and beneath that, something biological, something close. He was sitting at the table, back to me, shoulders I recognized, the exact way my father sat when he was thinking, slightly forward, hands flat on the table surface, head dropped 1/2 inch as though the thought had weight. "Dad," he turned. His face was my father's face, every line of it, every year of it, but the skin translucent, like tissue paper stretched over machinery. I could see the mechanism beneath his ribs, brass gears turning, a pendulum swinging inside his sternum. His eyes were hollow, and in the hollow, black oil catching light. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as disappointed. "You weren't supposed to check the basement, son." His voice was the sound of grinding metal, not a metaphor. The consonants were produced by something physical happening inside his throat. "The lock was a lie," he said. "We didn't keep the double in the box. We kept the box in the double. The house is the lock, and you just broke the house." The walls began to vibrate. He stood up, 7 feet, 8 feet, his limbs elongating in segments like a folding rule, joint by joint. His fingers, those familiar hands, extending, thinning, hardening, until each fingertip terminated in a silver sewing needle, 6 inches long, trembling with the vibration in the air. He wasn't my father. He was a biological key, and I was the lock he had been designed to open. He lunged. The movement was wrong, too fast, too segmented, each limb moving independently of the others like the machinery beneath had separate drivers. I grabbed the nearest object, a lead-heavy iron chair, and swung with everything in me. It connected with his chest and shattered. The iron cracked against him and fell in pieces, and the impact revealed a cavity where his ribcage should have been. And inside the cavity, black oil pooled and still, and thousands of tiny broken locks in every shape and size, corroded and silent and dead. The floor split open. The kitchen floorboards dissolved, and beneath them, gears, a sea of turning, grinding gears, silver and copper and iron, stretching down farther than light could reach. The sound was everything. It filled my skull and emptied it simultaneously. I fell through a century of Thorne family history. I saw my grandfather, his face, his shoulders, his hands merged with the body of a steam boiler, his face part of the pressure gauge, the needle of the gauge tracking his pulse. I saw my great-grandmother's form woven into a loom, the weft threads threaded through something that had been her. I saw names carved into every gear I passed, each one a thorn, each one integrated into the mechanism, their individuality reduced to function. Every generation, one thorn is chosen to be the lock, one to be the key. My father was the key tonight. He had turned. I landed, not gently, but I landed on iron inside the cube. I was on the inside of the black iron box, looking up through the open door at my own basement. The stone walls, the ember light bulb, the darkness at the edges of the beam, and him, Elias. He was standing at the threshold of the vault door, holding a flashlight, his face open with confusion, his eyes wide with the specific fear of someone who has just woken to a sound they have no name for. He was shaking. He was reaching for the handle of the iron door. Whether to pull it closed or to open it further, I couldn't tell. I tried to scream. What came out was the frequency. The metallic shriek. My voice was the sound of a hinge tearing. I looked at my hands. Silver needles where my fingers had been, rusted parchment pulling tight across my knuckles. My father's wedding ring fused into the bone of my left ring finger, warm and immovable. The filter had worked. In the 10th of a second it took for the original lock to snap. Something had been transferred. What I had been carrying, whatever makes a person themselves, the accumulated weight of memory and will and the specific frequency of a particular consciousness had been extracted from me and poured into the waiting shell above. I was the double now. I had always been the double. The filter had simply been waiting until the real Elias came close enough to complete the exchange. The new Elias smiled. It was not my smile. It was a smile that had been practicing for 80 years in the dark. Cold, exact. The smile of something that has learned the shape of an expression without ever learning what produces it. He didn't close the door to trap me. He stepped back into the basement. He bent down and picked up the broken locking bar from the stone floor. He held the two broken ends together and pressed. The metal didn't weld, it flowed. The way water joins the two surfaces finding each other, the break simply ceasing to have occurred. He lifted the bar and seated it in its housing. He didn't just lock me in, he erased the door, the seamless iron wall, the vault restored. No crack, no hinge, no handle, no trace of the opening that should not have been possible, that had changed everything, that I had walked through without understanding what I was walking into, and then nothing. I'm sitting in the dark. The white corridor is gone. The father thing is gone. There is only the hum, that low, constant frequency I spent 30 years not hearing, except now I understand it. I am the hum. I have become the bass note the house needs to maintain its particular frequency. I have become the thing my father told me kept the family safe. I have become the basement rule, and upstairs, the thing wearing my skin is sitting in my kitchen, eating my food, calling my friends on my phone in my voice, sending messages I would send, laughing at things I would laugh at, navigating my life with the quiet confidence of something that has had 80 years to rehearse every detail. He's very good at being me. He has had longer to practice than I have been alive. If you're hearing this, Look around the room you're in right now. Find the nearest door. Look at the lock. A lock doesn't just keep people out, it keeps the truth in. And somewhere in the foundation of the house you live in, the family you were born into, the face you've been wearing your whole life, there is a seal. And my lock was broken long before I was born.